Morning, Diana. Morning,
Hello,
Brian.
how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm a
Uh,
couple of late opening this up. We had a very good meeting with Ukraine and Ukraine group, both from the training side and the threat sharing side. So
Oh, that's
uh,
great.
reset my mind to come back to this topic.
Good.
uh, Good deal.
just so you know, I only have a half hour, so I'll be dropping at the halfway point.
Sure, no problem at all. And halfway point actually will be picked up by Serge Droz, who's joining us from Zurich today. So a lot of updates from that side as well. So thank you, Brian. No, duly noted. Um, so today, I think last week we just do a quick recap of last week. We had started the discussion around twofold. One on how do we kind of take the information uh, and the information the take the information from the board discussions and actually work on it. We also started talking about the organizational structure and how it impacts. Some of them are very personal stories of different CISOs experiences as to where they report and how the outcomes are. I think that's been a long drawn discussion from many years that we have had as to who reports to whom and how does that impact the overall cyber outcome of the organizations. So we would like to continue this discussion this week. And then the second aspect of that of this is basically making sure that um, we have a mechanism to engage with the board directly for the CISOs. And as you may already have experienced in your own personal spheres, that the access to the board uh, and the independent relationship that CISOs may have, has a deep impact on how the cybersecurity programs are influenced. So those are the two topics we'll start from. Of course, we will get into a little bit of depth on each of these as necessary. And this week we will kind of conclude the fourth and the fifth chapters. The fourth chapter was about the transition, organizations and transitions, which we had very good and thorough discussions with. And we'll go into the organizational side this week, the two meetings, and subsequently next week we'll close that chapter. In terms of tracks and timelines, I think we are doing pretty well in keeping to the timeline of getting the initial thoughts and everything articulated by end of March, so that early April we can aggregate all this information. We have already started getting some transcripts or clean transcripts back. We also have interest from Wiley and CRC Press to see how we can kind of get this published in a more formal way. And of course, our team and the Verbinden team that CFF works with is supporting us in making sure that we have the website and the continued engagement platform up. So that's kind of the update from the last week. We had one meeting last week. The second meeting, spring break, we just give people a little bit of slack. But I think timeline wise, we will be able to catch up and do the needful to stay on track. Um, so with that, I think this week's discussion, we will open up with the structure and the access of the cybersecurity leaders to the board. That's been a pretty debatable topic. Initially, we had considered two aspects. One is what happens when we have a direct line of channel of communication with the board from the CISO, and the discussions that you have, how, the legal as well as operational ramifications they may have, right? For example, you said something on the board meeting, and then as a CISO or a cybersecurity leader, you have a one-on-one with one of the board members, and what you share, how that can be taken, right? There is no clear guideline as of now. I think it's all a matter of your level of comfort, what you can or want to share with the board member. It's not necessarily on the record for the board meetings because it's outside the board meeting and duration technically, but anything that you share might be used in a way that you may not anticipate or the management may not anticipate, right? So I think these lines of communications are essential, but also need to have a very good guardrails and professional judgment as to what you can and cannot share, and what would be the channel of sharing that. So I'll open this discussion up, and Diana or Brian, feel free to jump in terms of the. Let's first discuss about the reporting structure and formal or informal. What are the ramifications, and then we'll go talk about how to handle the management side of it.
So, one thing that I mean, reporting structures, I think, are a really interesting one, because arguably, no matter where security reports up through, and including the CEO, arguably, it's possible for security to be reporting to someone who has different drivers than security does. And I don't mean this negatively or like, there's somebody being shady, but just if you're the CFO, you're obviously looking at profit. And if security says, well, there's a likelihood this could happen, it might bring us down, there's versus a CFO who's fighting really hard to get profitability for share price, or to take the company to sell it to another company, right? They're always going to maximize profits, and security, unfortunately, does maximize profits indirectly or even directly in the when we prevent an attack, but it's very hard to quantify that, and it's more of a long-term thinking. And sometimes CFOs they have to, because of shareholder pressure, they're very much thinking quarter to quarter. With the CIO, similarly, the CIO could have projects that are going to be about the company launching the next great product, the next great service, and security could be putting the brakes on and saying, but we need to delay that for testing reasons, for analysis reasons, right? All these. So I think that reporting is really important. And no matter where the security person's reporting, you're going to have a little bit of this push-pull. And I think that's where some of whether they're going to the CFO, the CIO, the CTO, even the CEO, I think the bigger problem is that tension between security is often very long-term, and it does look like a cost center from one lens versus this sort of shorter term. And I know companies always say they're planning long term, but a lot of them are making decisions for profitability short term.
Right. And I think from a reporting structure wise, it can very much influence where in how you invest and accept risks, right? Brian, any thoughts on specific areas of reporting channel?
Well, so I think it's important that if we're talking about the CISO or the security lead, that they be reporting into somebody who's risk focused, and they have the ear of someone who's risk focused, rather than just necessarily the CIO who has other conflicting missions. So whether that's the general counsel, or the COO or the CEO or the chief risk officer, I think it's important that there's that connectivity there. And I think there may have just been an article in the Wall Street Journal on that actual topic, which discusses that the CISO is now getting out from under the CIO as its primary direct report, because people are recognizing that it's more of a global risk, global business issue, and not just an IT issue.
Yeah, and I think that we also talked about the conflict of interest that might arise based on the CIO's mandate to build versus CISO's mandate to secure, right? And that influence too as well.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, everybody agrees we should have security by design. So it's not an afterthought, it's being baked into and incorporated into the product from the beginning, the product or service. whether it's internal or external, and data privacy by design. But it's one thing to say that, and then it's another thing to allow the actual hard work and time it takes to do that. So that's part of the reason I think it's pretty important that the CISO report into risk officers or GCOs or those that are focused on that kind of thing, and can emphasize the importance of that to other management.
Sure. So I think there is a there is a connotation of the open channels that they would have when they are a one one plus from the CEO or one plus from the board versus when they are dug deep in. So there is also the open prospect of CISOs directly reporting to the CEOs, and even though that trend has not really solidified yet, because where they currently report and who hires them, do you see that trend as a positive trend to reinforce cybersecurity's presence in the C-suite directly?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be a positive trend. I do, just sort of looking at tea leaves, and sometimes I'll look at job postings because I get curious about who, where people are in the line of succession. And what I've noticed is that while it is true the CISO does seem to be moving from the CIO, I don't see them as much moving into CEO. There are some CISOs, obviously, that do, but what I'm seeing is a bit of a trend to what Brian was talking about, chief risk officer, and which, it could be good, bad. And the other thing is chief compliance officer, which I think could be, and I know that we can say security compliance isn't security all we want and everything, but that one, if the chief compliance officer really rises up, or if there's a combo chief risk compliance officer and the CISO reporting into that, then you could have some of those standard arguments that we had back in the day with back to the classic compliance isn't security, where the compliance risk officer may be trying to go through this very narrow pathway, and the CISO is looking at this sort of broader risk approach. Yeah. Or it could be better, I mean, because CIO really there is a lot of tension with that build versus secure.
So I think, it might as well be beneficial for the audience in general for this particular, board book, is that you'd have, it's probably good to see the different scenarios and the impact, both the positive and the negative, as the different lines of reporting for the CISOs, and then let the organizations choose what part is probably right for them. And in this case, we discussed the chief financial officer, the chief information officer, chief compliance officer, general counsel, chief risk officer, at least those 5 I can think of, in addition to the direct reporting to the CEOs, that we can take up as case studies and see what are the different implications of this reporting channel, right? If it makes sense.
Chief privacy officer, I've heard too, and that one is like that's another one where there can be a lot of tension.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that the general counsel is probably the best person, because whether it's because the issue of compliance and data privacy are narrower than the issue of cybersecurity and what the CISO has to do. Yeah. So, and they handle issues beyond what the CISO is doing as well. So I think someone with a broader scope and the broader mindset of risk for the whole company, whether it's compliance risk or an incident risk, I think I'm a big fan of the reporting to the general counsel.
I completely agree with that, and I don't know how we say this. It's going to have to be, carefully worded. But if it's a general counsel that is technically oriented and also open to continue learning the technology, yeah.
I think it's a two-way street. There's a little give and take going on both sides. If I may add, I think I have seen in my career, CISOs and chief security officers reporting to all of the six plus the seventh from the CEO side, and there are a little bit of operational changes that need to happen, and then probably that's the guidance that we add, is that when a CISO is reporting to the general counsel, or even the chief risk officer, those organizations are typically not. I mean, they're necessarily cost centers in most cases. They don't have the budget structure that is required to support the financial investment that needs to go into security. Typically they would operate with a very thin budget and not necessarily the extensive investment that CISOs need. And those two towers are more advisory than they are operational, in terms of hands-on,
Right.
owning infrastructure or putting together infrastructure. So I think that's where the target operating model for a cyber organization, as it relates to the target operating model of the organization itself, needs to be realigned, and financials need to be kind of structured and streamlined. In many cases, I've seen where you have a chief security officer, especially larger organizations which can afford to do so, whether GC or the chief risk officer, they would have a finance person in the team, fully embedded, that can work on the on at least setting up the financial model that is required. It is probably imperative to say that the finance persons typically, not the first person to understand cybersecurity, and if you don't understand the different nuances and the priorities, it's very difficult to help shape the budget or the financial structure that is required, which will completely change and in not in the same lines as a GC or a CRO would be, right? So governing cybersecurity, governing CISOs and consultative CISOs typically do very well in that model, because
Right.
it doesn't really change the GC or the chief risk officer organizational structure. But operational CISOs and execution-oriented CISOs who actually run architecture, engineering, own IT infrastructure, and also the security infrastructure, typically have a difficult time, not that it's impossible, but difficult time to adapt to that new model, get their get their bosses understanding and approval to expense and invest in the budget, right? So I think those are the two considerations that I would put in when we talk about those two areas. Yeah. Good deal. So now this is very helpful. I think we'll probably divide this into at least 6+1 sections. I noted down we have chief financial officer, CIO, the compliance and privacy is together probably, and the GC and the chief risk officer in addition to the CEO. Each of them, we need to have a very clear guideline, both on the considerations, positive and negative, that need to be addressed. Okay. Second, let's talk about the implication of this and the direct line of channel or line of communication that CISOs have to the board. Many CISOs are being asked to present to the board and the steering committees, and this project itself is is motivated by the fact that more and more CISOs need help and need additional resources to support this. So any thoughts on how you can have a guided conversation, or probably a structured model to support the CISO to the board discussions and communication?
I mean, one thing I'd say about the CISO to the board communications is, if possible, actually make room for the CISO to do the presentation, because it's very often, give me some slides and we're going to present them for you, whoever they're direct reporting into, or even sometimes the CEO will say, just give me. So I think actually having the CISO in front of the board matters. And the other thing is to have some sort of cadence. And I'm paraphrasing John Dixon, but he always says, you don't want the CISO to meet the board for the first time after an incident. I mean, or a material deficiency. So making sure that they're in there early and that there's some kind of a relationship, I think is really, really important. And then I think the other stuff, it's like how much time. It depends on how long are your board meetings. Are they 2-hour board meetings? Some companies have day-long board meetings. That's going to start to impact how much time the CISO gets with them. But I think what's really important is that they meet the CISO before an incident, and that they actually do know the CISO and don't always hear things from someone else just reading the slides.
Right. So engage the CISO in advance and make sure that they are the ones who are presenting the first-hand report of cybersecurity. Of course, working with whoever they report to have an agreement. The board meeting is one channel. The other channel is committee meetings. Some of the cyber matters are discussed under committees, and typically, I've seen audit committee are probably the ones that they get plugged in most. They are also sometimes embedded into or kind of a side discussion happens on the personnel committee, personnel and compensation committee, to have take action on as well as incentivize personnel engagement, especially on the management side. So committee meetings are probably the next one if you can think of.
Committee or just establish a security council, and that security council has a monthly meeting. There could be somebody from the board on it. There could certainly somebody who's in the C-suite should be on that council. But yeah, that way you've got somebody who's the CISO has an opportunity to check in with the broader organization and their own directives. It's not a full board presentation, but they're still much more engaged in having input from this larger group by having a security council. Plus, I think that it's actually better for risk distribution, because the CISO isn't off making decisions in a bubble.
Yeah. All right, then, and the third one is one-on-one between CISOs and board members, which could be formalized or which could be, in general, I think for someone to have a relationship, so that they're understood well and their styles as well as their aspirations, so to speak, is appreciated or recognized, is something that is a good channel to have the CISO and board members. A direct line of communication. May not be the entire board, but typically, somebody is typically more understanding of the issue and knows it to inform the rest of the board. What are your thoughts on the one-on-one channels between the CISO and the board?
I think informally, if it's about relationship building, let's go have some coffee and get to know each other better. I think that makes sense, because relationships equal better communication. I think if it's anything that's going to be a decision, a risk decision for the enterprise or the organization, personally, I think it's better if that's done not just one-on-one, but if it's done either the CISO speaking with the executive committee of the board, perhaps, or the CISO speaking with their security council. Because otherwise, if you have too many one-on-ones, you can start getting games of telephone happening and miscommunication. And so I would be a little bit wary of that if it's around, formal risk decisions. I'd want more people, a more formal thing like the council or committee.
Yeah, it's also gonna raise red flags to regulators or courts that, like, you didn't meet with the actual board or with the committee. You quote unquote got approval from one person who probably is now saying they didn't actually approve it, they were just listening. And that sounds like the CISO is doing something potentially underhanded, trying to conceal the actual issue, like trying to not bring it in front of the board, which probably wasn't the intent at all. But it just ends up looking that way. So I agree 100%.
Okay, good. Are there any regulatory requirements that Brian or Diana, you're aware of that might be conflicting with this channel and something that could be published? I mean, beyond the general, liability or disclosure that we need to have, anything specific that
Yeah. I think for SEC registrants, the new rules are going to require the entity to disclose how the board is informed and how management is informed on security issues. And my guess is most people aren't going to say it's in part through one-on-one one-on-one casual meetings with various board members. And so then you're going to potentially have a materially misleading statement in a public disclosure. So that's one example how it could come out.
I don't know if it's still active, but I remember back when SOX was first getting implemented, the undue influence on your assessor or auditor was a big deal. And that was it was used very often to prevent, sort of ad hoc one-on-ones, because for the big decisions, they wanted to make sure everything was documented properly.
I think that's still very much in place, right? But Brian probably can speak as well on this one. Like at EY, we have audit and independence very clearly identified, and the lines of communication there is very, I think there are some protective or I would say, protective mechanisms that prevent you from doing this at all. And the second is, if you are part of that, if you are part of a prescribed channel, or you are covered entity or person, you can't even, you can't share, right, at all, right? So I think that impedes the full effective use of this channel, more of a relationship building, and not necessarily as a formal way of creating any, it doesn't add to the operations. It adds to more of a personal relationship, and you have to have full disclosure that you have had this meeting, and probably have a memo as well recording what you discussed, right? Okay. Good deal. Hey, welcome, Marcel.
Hi. Sorry, I was waiting on the Teams channel that never opened, and then I realized I was barking up the wrong tree. Sorry.
If I have to do this at the cost of cancel the meeting out, because I think it's confusing people.
Yeah.
But the Teams add the channel by default, and there is no way to strip out after that.
It's funny. So and then I went into I thought, like, wait, listen, this should be a Zoom link, shouldn't it? So I found you finally. Sorry.
Yep, no worries at all. I have to actually, that reminds me to tell Serge not to join the Teams meeting, join here.
Okay.
Okay, so Marcel, just to get you up to speed, we are discussing about the relationship, both in terms of the organizational structure, who reports to who, and also the communication of the board and line of communication and the board and CISO relationship. We looked at the different impact and influence of the different reporting, as to if the CISO reports the chief financial officer or the CIO versus the chief risk officer or the general counsel. What we intend to do with this is have specific guidance, both in terms of positive and negative impacts it can have, and what organizations might want to do to address this. What we are getting into now is specifically board communication, the different lines of communication of the CISO with the board. First being the board meeting, second being the committee meetings, and the third being the one-on-one relationships and the implications there, right? Sure, Brian, thank you. So your thoughts on the lines of reporting, and any personal experiences that you could share for who CISO's reporting structure?
As a CISO, it's good to be where the money sits in the organization. I mean, where you can have an impact. I'm a strong believer of CISOs that have their own budget to invest, rather than having to influence people to then invest, right? If you're the one responsible for the program, especially when you're leaning more to be a first-line CISO, then it's best to sit where you have the most impact. I myself, I report to the CIO, on a direct line. I know people that are in finance, so more leaning to the finance and risk perspective, etc., playing it indirectly. I enjoy playing it directly. So I have my own budget, I have my own projects, I invest, rather than having to convince people about investments, because if you do that, usually it depends on the industry, but you might end up being the last in the line that doesn't get any budget. So that was, for me, that was a condition sine qua non before I joined Post. I said, I want to have my group, I want to have my budget. I'm a normal line manager, if you want. I report line, not staff into the CIO. But I guess it very much depends on also on the markets. For us here in logistics, this is a normal way to work. And as far as dotted lines, I report to all the board members. So I have my one-on-ones quarterly with every board member, including the CEO, where I discuss what their how their business is concerned with information security. I have slides. I can document that I had an exchange with them, but I tend to do it more on an informal base, really to find out what is it that is driving these people, whether do they have their pain points, and how can I contribute as a CISO into it. And then I think for the board of directors, I show up at least once a year, whether to give them a full overview of the whole company on cybersecurity, and to be there for discussions, because frankly that's what I think they want to flick through quickly to the slides and then really use the time to discuss with me. So there's this if you're reporting into a line, you will always have the other lines missing. So if you report into finances, you'll not be in the room where they discuss where they discuss IT. If you're in the business line, you will be not in the other meetings. There is always something missing, but you have to be courageous enough to take what is missing, to establish the lines of communication that are not missing. If in an organization, in a tree-wise organization, as opposed to matrix, you report into one line and you miss all the others, and that's what you have to build up with building your own network.
Sure. So I think, Marshall, that's probably a relatively ideal position to be in. I think there is a sense of and level of maturity that is also required at the CISO with their skills and talent that they can apply to make the best out of that reporting. There are only so many of the CISOs that are able to do that, and I think that's one of the goal of this exercise, is to make sure they know that this is feasible and possible, and they can negotiate before they join in a certain organization, right? So, this, you hit a lot of points home when it comes to getting to an ideal situation.
The proposal of Swisspost before I joined was a different one. The position was a different one. The remit, the responsibilities, the remuneration, the having an own team and own budget, that was different, and it was part of the negotiation. And quite frankly, I had a job in another company that I was very happy about. For me, it would have been an option to stay where I was. But I told them, if you want me, that's sort of, I know that I need this.
To make the best impact.
Yeah. It's like, if you're a pilot and you sit into a flight deck and everyone says, don't touch the buttons, don't grab this. Yeah, well, yes, you can as well sit in the back and be enjoy the view as a passenger. But as a CISO, you have to have your hands on the controls, right? If you want to have an impact, they have to let you into the flight deck. Otherwise, you're like, pardon the image, but you're like a fig leaf, right? You're there because someone has said that there needs to be a CISO, and you're like the scapegoat. If something goes wrong, you're the one that face the press and face the music and be gone, right? And I would never take a position like that. So be careful to understand why they want the CISO. in the first place, like, yes. What's
the purpose?
Your role? And maybe it's only it's
and
to have someone face the music, right?
There is actually a compliance requirement, and especially with the SEC and the publicly traded organizations in the US, that you have to hire a CISO. They will hire a CISO, and that person might not even have the single authority that they need to correct the ship. So very true.
So
we'll
like
have a session on that.
So that would be one piece of advice that needs to go into the book, right? Be careful to understand why they want a CISO in the first place.
Yep. Very true. Very true. Good deal, Serge. Welcome to the meeting, and thank you for joining us. The floor is yours if you want to introduce yourself and jump right into what we're talking about.
Yes. So my name is Serge Gross. I'm working at the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs as a senior advisor to advise diplomats about cybersecurity and things like, what is the internet and why is it dangerous? I'm also on the board of the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, which is a global umbrella organization of security teams currently active in more than 100 countries. We bring together close to 700 teams now from governments and the private sector. And so 700 may not sound like much, but we are very proud to have, for example, the teams from most governments in there, including China and Taiwan. We're probably one of the few organizations that have Chinese and Taiwanese government people talking to each other. And we don't really promote that very much because we want to keep it that way. But that's my background. But the reason I raised the hand is to actually kind of complement to what Marcel said. I think when you look at Swiss Post, and I'm based in Switzerland, obviously, you see that its security postures is somewhat unusual for organizations that size, in the sense that it's very visible. They get, sadly, a lot of flack for it because they're very transparent about things that go wrong. They do public pen testing tests. But I think what this really means is that they're actually doing the right thing. If you don't want to see any mistakes, look away. And
that was like 4 years ago, right?
Yes.
But it still runs around, which just made it again with the second launch of it, right? So,
but I mean, even the second launch, I mean, this created so much things, and I think they're really doing quite well. And I don't know Marcel very well, but I know the security team of Swiss Post very well, and this is one of the best ones we have in Switzerland. And I think I think you're doing the right thing here. And what you just said, you don't want to just have it for the job for compliance, but to actually move something, I think is really, really an important thing. And I can give you a different example. I'm not sure if you followed Adobe much. Adobe has been plagued by security vulnerabilities. About half a year ago, we got a new CISO, which I happen to know, Martin van Horenbeck. And if you compare their security bulletins now compared to only 6 months ago, you do see a difference. And the difference is that they're now timely. They start talking about the impact for customers. So the last one about Cold Fusion says, we've discovered a vulnerability in this Cold Fusion product, and our team has observed attacks exploiting this vulnerability. That is not something that companies often say. Some of the big tech companies have started doing this. And I think again, the CISO, which I know is I mean, he has a very strong, what I call moral compass, and he wants to do the right thing. And it shows immediately, if a company lets people do this, it will have better security at the end of the day. So
No, I think that's
Marcel
very
said
correct.
about, let us try things out. Let us push the buttons. That is so essential.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I think the aperture of the C-suite and the management has changed quite a bit with respect to security. How you approach it definitely makes a difference, right? Whether you're doing it for the right reason or doing it for the sake of having a CISO and calling them, calling one when things go down is makes a tremendous difference for the business itself in the longer term. And I don't think the business and the management really understands this yet. And that's one of the reasons why we have this, board book initiatives to make sure that organizations understand what is possible, the art of the possible, because this is possible. Like if an organization like Swiss
Yes.
Post, and we have spoken with several others, luminary now, but very, very rebel when they started, right? So when you are asking the management to do things that are contrary to the current principles, or their eyes are not open to the challenges, or they're not honestly accepting the risk, and they're blindsided, I think there is a risk for the business to fail, and business failing in this today's world for a cyber issue is not unusual. At least they're tremendously disrupted when they don't have a cybersecurity program that is in line with the current days, right?
Yes.
So thank you so much for bringing this up. Yes, Marcel.
The thing is, nowadays, if you don't have really a strong security program as a company, and you face an issue and you stand in front of court, you can't wiggle your way out, because it's a standard practice. Saying that you haven't known as a board member, this simply doesn't work anymore. It doesn't play, because the judge will take the business, will look at your business decisions, will look at the normal way, at the best practices, and simply will realize that you haven't done enough, and then you'll hang for it, quite frankly. So that is something you can that has changed. I just passed the school for board of directors. This is one thing that they hammered home in the first module, right? It's part of your compliance. It's part of what you're there, and don't try to explain the court that you hadn't known, and you weren't savvy enough. They will question why you didn't invest enough personally. So
True.
And if you want to have a CISO, give him or her the possibilities to act, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very right. So maybe Serge, we back up a little bit and get your thoughts on a few of these areas. And there are 6 areas that we're looking at. One is points of view from the leaders in this space as to what kind of cyber expertise needs to be on the board, right? For a business to have cybersecurity expertise, whether it's a cybersecurity expert as part of the board, or the general knowledge and awareness and a pretty broad understanding of cybersecurity and its implications across the board members, right? The first one we're talking about, and we spent quite a bit of time unraveling that in the last 6 or so weeks. And then the second is, how is the board informed? This could be triggered by an incident. This could be triggered by by a specific protocol, or this could be a general reporting that the board gets briefed on cybersecurity issues as part of their general briefing. Then the third one is, how does the board act? The board typically acts on on the fiduciary responsibilities and guidance and oversight but they can be very decisive and influential when they act, right? And typically that's their role. The fourth is we talked about companies in transition and the influence and the considerations that we should have when there is a merger and acquisition, or there is a new big project that needs to happen, or a divestiture that needs to happen. So making sure that cybersecurity is a key considerations during those transition as much as during normal operations. And today in this world, there is definitely transition is normal. The fifth one, which is this week's topics, has been board and CISO relationship. That also includes the reporting line of command for boards, for the CISOs. As you heard, as you joined this meeting, like, Marshall talking about his reporting structure and what he had to negotiate to get to the point where he is in. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a very, firm position that you need to have. And different reporting lines have different, pros and cons that need to be considered. Everything is not right for all organizations. So what works for what? And then subsequently, we are going to go into discussions next week is when to engage the board. And that goes along with the line of how does the board act and how are they informed, and completely summarizes and encapsulates the different structure that we need to have for board, effective board, engagement. So those are the 6 angles we're talking in the last few weeks, and the outcome of this discussion is a physical book that will be initially used, and then a live project that will continue to inform and engage with the board members and cybersecurity professionals. Will be online, and a forum and discussion forum, so that we don't not only have a point in time reflection of the board and CISO engagement, but continuous improvement and progress in this particular field, right? Again, your thoughts are welcome all across the board here, as you can see that having a farm cybersecurity leader at the top of the line definitely helps. It is as much a leadership and management function as it is a technical function. I think the leadership and management and risk management specifically is more prominent and impactful than just having someone who's technically savvy in this role.
So, I mean, since we're focusing on that, on kind of the board CISO relationship, let me kind of elaborate on my thoughts. Sure. On this one. In my previous job, just before, I've been with the Swiss Government for a year now. Before that, I was actually kind of the CISO of Proton Mail, and Proton Mail is maybe a somewhat different company from established big companies, and but it has, like all organization, its pros and cons. I think, but for me, what's really important was that I had access to most of the board members having different functions. I mean, initially I reported directly to the CTO, which kind of made sense because he was the one who hired me and thought it's probably necessary to have a senior security person in there. But at the same time, I was actually having kind of semi-regular kind of quality time with the CEO, which worked on a fairly different level. And Andy, the CEO, was very much concerned with the strategic things. So he wasn't really interested in the technical details, but it was very important for him to feel that his technical staff understood this. So I think, and I always found this, personally, I found this challenging, kind of this balance between walking the technical way, because I feel you need this so you can talk to your people, you understand what these people do, and also talk to a CEO who has very little technical understanding. And he was actually pretty technical. And so what I often did, and I thought I was quite successful, is when the question was, can you tell us about Project X? I would get the people that were working on this project. And I would say, I think it's probably helpful if you can arrange a direct conversation with these people, and we will prepare this meeting, obviously, so that they would speak a language that would be understood at the top. but that made the whole thing a lot more authentic. And I think that is a very big problem, because security people often either are totally technical and they'll end up talking about technology that is not interesting for the board level. Or then there's the people that just go out and see their role as the police, the cyber police in the organization. And that's not the role of security. The role of security, in my view, is not to tell people what they're allowed to do and not to do. That's really the board's job. Security people's job is to, on one hand, protect against identified risk. On the other hand, make the risk assessment, the cybersecurity risk assessment for the board. So they need to go out and be able to explain to the board, look, we see risks here, we feel something may go wrong, and we feel that can be the consequences. And ideally, they also talk to the business people to figure out what is the business impact. I mean, let's face it, if it's a server that's not connected to anything that gets compromised, who cares? But if it's something that contains really crucial data, then maybe, I mean, you have to do this business. And so for me, long story short, it was really important to talk to all the different stakeholders, be this the CTO, be this the finance or business people, but also the legal people. And I often needed to explain them the rationale. Why would I want to do this? For example, with the legal people, there was a lot of conversations about information sharing. That's something that's very, very tricky. Companies don't like to share information, and Proton was no different. But actually, by moving the company into a position where we could start sharing information with trusted partners, we gained so much more input that would allow us to start to understand our risk surface. So I think it's very, very important that as a CISO, you can build these bridges. And for that, you need to, I mean, I had my typical line manager where I had my weekly one-on-ones, but then every month or every second month, I would have conversations with other people from the board, which I felt were very, very valuable. Just because security has so many aspects. Marcel said that, and he said you report to one organization and not the other, and you miss out. And I think this really is a big issue, and boards need to make sure that because information technology affects pretty much everybody today, everybody needs to have a certain awareness. I think if you just treat this as another bucket or another silo, you run a risk of losing something.
Very true. And what you just outlined, Serge, is true for small or big organization. Doesn't really matter the size of the organization. The fundamental principle of the CISO and the cyber leadership function, right? That we need to realize. Maybe as a deeper dive into this, how does and both of you kind of represent very diverse organizations, right? Serge from Proton Mail side, of course, privacy and security first service, and that's the mission of the organization. Did you see or feel in your discussions with the C-suite, and doesn't have to be anything that's that you cannot share, but in general, how does the board makeup make your job easier or harder? Is it because that you are part of an organization which very well understood the security and privacy culture? It was relatively easy to establish that sort of rapport and relationship as well as impact, or you had to do some coaching and training for them as well?
I mean, I certainly had to do training as well, and especially if when there is new board members. And I mean, I really give a lot of credit to Andy about that. When someone new joined the board, he would always arrange kind of a 1-hour conversation for that person with me. And so I thought that was very, very valuable. And yeah, how shall I say? So, I mean, when I worked at companies where the board kind of treated security as kind of just a nuisance, something you've got to do too, like the same way you got to have a canteen. Then you got canteen quality security, and you didn't get first-class security, which is probably what you should have. And
Yep, I think that definitely tells a lot. Marcel, you wanted to add something to that?
I guess it's changed a lot over the past 10 years. When I go back in time, 10 years ago, it was all about telling people that security was important at all. And nowadays, that's not. Security awareness is no longer part of what I do. It is more about what risk should we take, how much should we invest, etc. But it's never a question whether or not it is important. That was never a question. That was never a part of the discussion with board members. So that is given. I had the impression that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you as a CISO had the function to make sure the door is opening. But once you're in, you have to have a meaningful discussion. You have to be able to discuss with these people and make judgments or decisions about investments. So, like last week, we discussed the risks of the logistics department, for example, the largest organization within Swiss Post. So fundamentally, we're like 50% of what we do is logistics. So we went over the risk. We went over the plausible worst case scenarios, and went through the investments we had taken to make sure that then none of them plays out. So it was more about, nowadays it's more about how to do things, not if at all. And I would, quite frankly, would not work for a company that in 2023 still discusses about if. I mean, time is precious. Why would I have so much fun in my organization, because I realize it's about the why, and it's about the how and not the if and the why, right? So
right. And how much of that, I think, how much of that is leadership and how much of that is having access to resources, staff, and every CISO probably has similar challenges, and some have unique challenges to their organization where they operate from.
It's a leadership position.
Yeah. It's
a leadership position. I mean, being internally in my organization, I mean, and I'm sitting in the middle of it, right? You're leading a smaller or larger team, but leadership is also about influencing, right? And of course, I mean, everything that comes with it. I have my budget. I need to understand what the priorities of our customers on the market are.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that they want to see us invest more? Where do we have issues that need to be addressed? So that it very much is a leadership position. You don't need anyone. You don't need the policemen that run around and tell people that this is an important thing. If a company by 2023 doesn't understand the why, then frankly they have other issues.
Yeah, very true.
So,
I think that's a pretty solid statement to close this meeting today. I mean, at the top of the hour.
That wasn't it.
Mic drop.
It wasn't my intention to have to find the words to this. I just realized I enjoy the conversations we have. So you see.
Yeah.
Very true. No, thank you so much. Thank you both, and Dana and Catherine.
Thank you.
For being
Have a
with
good
us.
day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.